We are really honored to have Doug here. Doug is a local fellow, grew up in Arlington. He shot for we shot locally for a local paper, but then he worked for AP for 15 years, and then has now been in the New York Times for 12 years. He's considered to be one of the finest photographers in journalism today. He's won countless awards, including 2 Pulitzer Prizes. But more importantly, I think it's interesting whenever I meet a photographer in the business, especially White House photographers, you mention Doug and their eyes light up and they say, he's the man. And he really is. And it's, hopefully the show here, it'll show some of what makes him special. As they say, it's his inventiveness, creativeness, the angles, the technology. He's never stopping. They'll come back from the same event with their shots, and then they'll look at his and say, how did he do that? And I think his other secret weapon is his charming personality, which gives him amazing access. He's worked with every president and first lady since Reagan, and I think they all love him, and as a result, he's able to get them much more comfortable in what he does. He's married, has 2 kids in college, and with that, I'll give Doug.
Barry, thank you for having me too. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. I apologize again for not being here last Thursday. My schedule is usually not my own. Being on the White House beat, we're called at any minute to change our schedules. And last week was a perfect example. I had to fly to Chicago unannounced, and that was preempted by a trip over the weekend to Afghanistan, which was one of those silent, secret trips that I found out just the night before. Called into the White House. Sorry, Doug, your Memorial Day weekend is shot. You got to be at Andrews tomorrow night. You can't tell your wife where you're going. You can't tell anybody. You can't put it in an email. You can't talk on the phone about it. But you're leaving. You'll be back Monday. So I can tell you a little bit more about that trip later. But again, as Jeff said, I'm a photographer with the New York Times. I've been there about 12 years. I started a local newspaper, the Fairfax Journal here, believe it or not, and then went to the Associated Press. And I'll start showing some pictures. Obviously, freedom of press around the White House, every administration is important, and I'm happy to talk about any legal issues as far as how it impacts the legal system with our photographs, which it does quite a bit. We're always contacted about getting a picture from either a protest or somebody being arrested around the White House or anything like that. Or when we were traveling to South Africa with Mandela, there were a lot of questions about some of the events that the president was going to that really helped out the legal justice system. So those sort of things impact our job. And being at the White House, obviously, I have probably, as Jeff said, one of the best jobs in the business. I get to cover the White House and I get to cover sports. So between the two, you can't get it. I mean, it's a guy's dream, to cover politics and to be able to travel and do world events like the Olympics and golf tournaments and the World Cup and anything like that. So I'll start showing, but I'll talk over anything, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. Actually, I look forward to them. But I'll fly through them. Obviously, that's where I spend a lot of time. I've been covering the White House so long. Does anybody know what that is? Cigarettes. Right? When I first got on board Air Force One in 1984, I believe it was, they were giving out cigarettes on the plane. So that's how long it's been since I've been there. Now they give out M&Ms. Because Obama gives out M&Ms. Reagan eventually, the second term, Nancy got rid of them and started handing out jelly beans on Air Force One. And the press does fly on Air Force One. Every flight, that was the first time I met him. Back then I had hair, as you can see. That's what a normal photo op back in the day looked like. All photographers wore suit and ties every day. I still wear a shirt and tie every day to the White House. Every day I go to work, because a lot of times, as you know, in my business, you're treated how you look. And this is what it looks like now on there. This was a camera I set up. I asked one of the White House officials if I could put a camera on the mantelpiece and hide it in the ferns. It took 3 days of begging, pleading. Finally, the Secret Service agreed to it, but there had to be agreements that I could only have the remote in my hand. It was fired with an electronic remote, a wireless remote. So, and they handed me the remote when I went in the office. and they had to explain to the Prime Minister from England that it was there, and he had no problem with it, so that's why it worked out. That's the view. I'm over on the left, as you can see, just above the lampshade, and I have a little button there. I've got my regular camera, but I'm also taking it. This was the first guy I photographed. Great guy to photograph. He was great for pictures. Spent a lot of time at Camp David. Every weekend they would go up. He and Nancy would go up. Traveled. That was my first foreign trip where we went over and met Gorbachev. We did a lot. Back then the U.S. and Russia were in good terms. Not like they are right now, but the Cold War was on. I was happy to be there the day that he made that announcement to tear down this wall in Germany. This was after the Challenger exploded. I was at the White House today. The Challenger exploded. Standing actually in Vice President Bush's office, about to take a picture of him. An aide walked in and said, "Whatever you're doing, sir, you've got to stop right now. The President needs you in the Oval Office." He left us, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. He went down, and at that time, the President had a small, probably 15-inch, old TV in there, watching CNN, and it just watched the Challenger explode. This was at the funeral just a week later down at NASA. This was just after his surgery, where he had colon cancer. Waited for days out there. He was great about coming back on the plane. He was one of those guys who always would tell you a great story. I even got invited up to the residence one night, one of the few guys that ever got invited up there. But he took a liking to me. That first picture where I was shaking his hand, I actually given him a tie. I had on a tie that he really liked. And he struck up a conversation about the tie I was wearing and invited me up. So I gave him the tie. This was his last day in office. Obviously, he cleaned everything off, saying goodbye to the staff. There's a lot of tears going up around the White House from the staff. And unfortunately, this was the next time he came to Washington. His funeral. It was a really sad time in Washington. This was from the top of the rotunda in the Capitol, one of the few places you get to go to. But and believe me, gut perception once you get up there. Can't have anything on your face, no glasses, no hats. I had to take off my tie. Even Gorbachev came back for it. Then Bush came to town. He was obviously vice president, but things changed real quickly. The morning, I'll never forget, the day after he was elected, or the day after the inauguration, when he came to the White House, when Ronald and Nancy were there, the place smelled like a florist. There were flowers everywhere. It smelled, just unbelievable flowers everywhere you went. When they got there, all the kids, we walked into the press room that next day, that Saturday after or I think it was Tuesday afterwards, and eggs, bacon, it smelled like you were at home. All the grandkids running around, there was football being played on the south lawn. It was just a totally different atmosphere. He even put in a horseshoe pit outside the Oval Office. The Oval Office is right behind him there, and he always invited members of the troops to come by and play. He has a clay course there. Actually, believe it or not, he invited me quite a bit to play with him. So I got to play with him quite. I know that doesn't look like him over there, but he had played a round of tennis, came into the lower press office, looked around and said, "Mills, where are you? You want to go throw some shoes?" And I was like, "Sure, sir, let's go." We got out, he had a tournament. Luckily, it was the White House photographer there when I beat him, and he said, "All right, that's it, you're never invited back." Luckily, he did. He invited me back. He had a bunch of tournaments, and he was just a lot of fun to photograph. He was always on the go, Kenny Bunkport, golfing, hold a press conference right after a golf tournament or a golf game. He had the record for playing 18 holes in two. I'm sure everybody here knows who he is. Really took the city by storm. I mean, it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, non-stop coverage of that. And everybody remembers I did not have sexual relations with that woman. This was the vote for impeachment. This was the day down at the White House when the vote came in. Again, this was a remote I had laid on the floor, or right behind the cabinet room, and pointed it back towards there, over in the back over there. That was his best friend when he left town, that's for sure, buddy. We'll move on to Bush now. So this was Bush. That was at a debate with Kerry. That was one of those things where better to be lucky than good. Somebody else's flash went off as I was taking my picture as he was walking up shake Kerry's hand, and then it was all about W. Great guy to cover. The Republicans did a great job when he came into office as far as, you know, drama like this. They were great at stagehand. You know, this was during the inauguration, Secret Service coming down Pennsylvania Avenue. This was the first time this was done at the Building Museum. Just, I mean, it's amazing how nobody's done anything like that. I mean, that you can't have a better backdrop than that, to have Air Force One and a campaign event. So this is the Rose Garden there. East Room, walking to the East Room. He didn't like us. Dick Cheney was not a fan of photographers or the press at the White House. It was pretty clear. And when W got upset, you knew it too. He was a great guy. He and I had a lot of fun together. He used to always ask me to go bike riding with him. But because I worked for the New York Times, he always brought that in. He would always bring that up and say, you know, Mills, if you ride with me, somebody's going to write about it. They're going to think you're a Republican. And I would say, sir, you know, it doesn't matter who's in office. You know, I'm apolitical. It doesn't bother me. You know, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. And he said, well, we're going to write about it, and you'll never hear the end of it. So you better not come, but I want you to come. I never got a chance to ride, but I wanted to. This was after you remember he choked on that pretzel at Camp David and fell out? All right, so we'll move on to 9/11. I happened to be with President Bush on 9/11. We were in Florida, started the morning as his normal day would. He would run every morning, like every other day. Went for a run. After the run, he ran around a golf course, 2 or 3 miles. And then we went to that classroom. The week started by, the president was bringing out a whole week or a whole month really on education. The First Lady was actually scheduled to speak up on the Hill. We were in the classroom. We had heard that there had been a plane crash in New York City, and that was about it. As we rolled up to the school, they said there's been a plane crash in New York City. Don't know how serious it is. We heard it's a small plane hit a building in New York. Little did we know that a lot more would come after that. But the president was in the classroom, obviously reading books, telling stories. When the chief of staff, Andy Card, walked into the classroom, we'd never seen him at an event like that before. It wasn't his custom to walk into the room. Walked in and whispered to the president, Mr. President, a second aircraft has just hit the World Trade Center. America's under attack. And so that's, you know, he was obviously, that's the look he had when we were going to go. The president wanted to go back to the White House. He was obviously advised by the Secret Service and everybody back in Washington not to come back. We got on board. On board during those days, this is our cabin, the press cabin. We had never had live television. We'd always been able to pick up the phone, call an operator upstairs and say, hey, we'd like to look at this movie, watch this movie, watch this movie. Never had we seen live CNN on television. Little did we know that they had DirecTV on the plane. So we're watching the videotape of the second aircraft, you know, it's obviously taped, but now they're saying the Pentagon has been hit. And about 30 minutes into our flight, we still didn't know where we were going. And one of the other cameramen was a Boy Scout. He got out his compass, and we were trying to find out where we were on the plane. The Secret Service came back, and we were like, where are we going? We have no idea. He'd like to go back to Washington. Well, we obviously knew that wasn't going to happen. Meetings with Andy Card. He was on the phone with the governor. And I remember the first time ever the Secret Service guy telling me, we could be up here for days of meeting. I'm thinking, days? He said, oh yeah, we can refuel this plane in midair if we have to. So, first thing we did, we landed. Once they realized that, you know, he could not go back to Washington, he went to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. First, I mean, it's shocking to think that this, you know, we get off the plane, the guys run around with M16s, complete chaos, there's no motorcade, we're put into these tiny little cars. This guy was ready to shoot you for taking his picture. We left Louisiana, he made a statement to the nation, we left Louisiana, went out to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, where the underground bunker is. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's a bunker underneath the ground where they have a huge situation room, probably as big as that pond. And that's where he spent 2 hours there. Then we flew back to Washington. Then they told us we were flying back to Washington. First time ever we'd ever seen any F-16s flying. They escorted us all the way back. By this time, though, we were told we were the only aircrafts in the air anywhere. They were so close that you could see the pilot's face. He gave us a thumbs up when we looked out of the window. Arrived back in Washington. Made an address to the nation that night. That's what it looks like if you're on the other side of that. And then, obviously, the next day, cabinet room, meetings, and calls around the world for support. You know, obviously, they had to build a coalition at that point. A lot of lonely times there. I mean, rarely did we see he and the First Lady standing out like that. There's a lot going on in the White House. He broke down and cried 2 days later in the Oval Office. We came in for a photo op, and somebody asked him about when he was going to New York City. He broke down and started crying. Made some remarks about going back to him. Then there was an event in the East Room about it, and on the South Lawn. And then we flew up to New York to Ground Zero. This is when we arrived here to meet the governor, the mayor, firefighters, obviously. This was here. He's standing on. I don't know if you've seen the 9/11 memorial, but they have a fire truck. By the end of it, they were eating out of his hand. He went in and he told them where that bar was made. It was made in a tobacco barn. He struck up a kite, bought these guys beers. He would have stayed there all night if they hadn't told him, we gotta go, we gotta go. But yeah, these guys loved him by the end of it. Just great. And he had to go back to the Senate for a little while. That's him on the subway car up there, on the plane here. Yeah, that's what it's like covering. I mean, it's exhausting. I mean, all they do, they're 18-hour days when you're covering the campaign. It's one of the most grueling things you do next to covering the Olympics. This was an ID1 in Chicago. Inauguration stuff. Air Force One plane. It's a great plane. I was saying earlier, I fly a lot on Air Force One. We have to pay for every flight. I'm sure somebody's curious who pays for that. The press has to pay first class plus $1 for every flight. After every event that he goes to, he signs books, signs anything that's backstage. This was actually the wild fly that they looked for weeks at the White House. Everybody talks about him using a teleprompter. He uses them quite frequently. Another remote picture. Yeah, Bo's great. Bo's a really friendly dog. Now they have, who knows the dogs? Sonny, thank you. I've seen enough. More rock star look. Yeah. Showed up at her graduation. That was, it started to rain during an event. He was like, "We need this. I don't mind getting wet." It's pretty funny. This was Bin Laden night. This is the night that they killed Osama bin Laden. I happen to be one of the lucky guys who has a really good source. Nobody here in the media, right? Yeah. I have a really good source who let me know that it was Osama bin Laden. I found out. I was the first one to find out what happened. And of course I called my reporter and gave her all the information, and she broke the story. So, I mean, having been there as long as I have, it's great to have connections. This was when we went to Afghanistan. This is not this past weekend, but very similar. You get on a helicopter, you're in flight. You know, it's a secret trip. You fly all night, you land in the dark. Nobody's allowed to have their phone on. They take all of our electronics, our phones, our laptops, and they put them in a secure box. So there's no way it's radiating any sort of frequency. Because you know, there's no telling who's following Air Force One. They think the Russians, the Chinese, anybody there, and you're put into a vehicle, and fully armored vehicle. And then we went to the palace, which you would think the palace in Afghanistan would be beautiful, but there were extension cords that were all taped together all the way around, 3 or 4 lights. Not what you think. This is some of the campaign stuff. I got to go behind the scenes. Never gets anything where he's quiet, where he's not alone. This is one of the buddies who traveled with the guy on the right, Nesbitt, one of his longtime friends. This is what it's like backstage when the president's making a secure phone call. There's 3 or 4. He's actually on the phone dealing with FEMA at the time. On the other side of that paper, there are people banging on the window and crap. He's at a rally on one side, and on the other side, he's on the phone chewing the FEMA director out about what's going on during Hurricane Sandy. And it's amazing to me and to listen to what's going on, how assertive he is, and the guy on the right is listening into the conversation, Pluff, and there's all these secure phones, everything, and then there's one Secret Service, I guess 2 Secret Service guys. No, one Secret Service on the right, on the left, and the other guy on the right's military who's in charge of the phones. And then 2 minutes later, he's out the door in a rally. See, Clinton came out to help him out quite a bit. This was the nasty debate. That's when Sesame Street was brought up. This guy surprised the hell out of us. Completely unannounced. We on a trip in Florida, he pulled, you're driving 2 hours to a campaign site, and they say, oh, you might stop here or there. Pulls over the side of the road, goes into a pizza parlor, and the guy, and they've already vetted the guy. The Secret Service has been there before and checked out who this guy is, and because they'll say, the staff will say, all right, that looks like a good place. Let's go check out this pizza parlor. So they go there the day before, or 2 days before the president may show up. Doesn't necessarily mean he will show up, but he may go there. We walk in the door. This guy is so excited that he grabs him and picks him up in the air. And the Secret Service never, they never lunged at him, never did anything, but it scared us. And we didn't know what was happening, because we couldn't see his face at that point, but apparently the woman on the left said, that he had his mouth open and he was cheering. He was a bodybuilder, great guy. This is what we compete with now. This was during the convention. This was the last campaign stop in Iowa. Started to cry. I had never seen him cry before. That was election night. Re-election night. Sworn in. Private, right here, there's only 4 photographers in the whole room. Three photographers, 3. The White House, it's one other photographer, myself. And that's taken with a remote. I couldn't even stand there. It was on a pole like over there, and I was standing here, and I had pre-focused where I thought they were going to be. And that's all I could take. And off to the inaugural. All right, so when we travel with the president, like this trip was in Africa, the helicopter in the foreground, we're traveling in the identical one. The president's in the first one up there. So we travel in like a motorcade, but it's in the air. And obviously we had just landed in Africa there. Or no return here. Nelson Mandela's cell, he toured that. It was his first time as president. He had been there when he was senator. Picked some little boy out of the crowd. This guy made his own rap music, and he was helping him out with that. Crowds in Senegal were amazing. Never seen anything like that.